So I was going to start with something totally different. I was going to start talking about uh, the slow walking of aid, and we'll get into that in a little bit, and what the effect has been, and even a weird side effect that I've observed. But I want to start in a very different place now because I was reading some of the back comments. And if you want to put comments in, I have it set on that says slow mode is on. Send a message every 1 second. So there's a slow mode that allows you like to prevent people from putting too many comments. I set it down to 1 second. So you can only set a comment every 1 second. And I'll try to answer your questions as quickly as I can. Put where you're from, by the way, in the chat. I'm just curious where you're all coming from. But somebody put this in the comments here. Dennis Hill, why the blank for patrons and members? How are we supposed to help Ukraine? Or are you just after the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 or so dollar signs? So wrong. Okay, so let me address that. I'm doing this right now as a thank you to members and patrons to answer your questions. It serves two purposes. First, I want to say thank you because when I went to Patreon originally, it was like, let me go there as a backup plan. Just come, you can be on Patreon for free, no problem. And then people like actually supported me. And I was like, wow, okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I really do deeply appreciate it. My business model, if I can be as crass in saying my business model, is not to go, I need a super chat. Send me the super chat. I need to stay in business. I'm gonna wait. I don't do that kind of thing, right? I do these short videos that are trying to be as condensed as possible to show what is happening to provide context in the war in Ukraine. And I do it in the morning, I do it in the evening, sometimes I do it in between. I'm actually teaching like I have a lighter teaching load this semester intentionally, and the idea is I can spend time doing this kind of thing. And then it just YouTube ad revenue pays my compensates me back for what I'm trying to do. So when somebody has joined here on Patreon or as a channel member, I greatly support it because it's such an encouragement. So I want to say thank you to those of you who have done that. So that's my motivation part one. Part two is if I talk to just members and patrons, these are people who have stepped up to support me, who are very few of them are trolls, right? So maybe I'm going to assume that Dennis is actually a good-hearted guy who really wants to support Ukraine and has really done stepped up as either a member or patron because that's the only way that he would get the access link to it, and then he's miffed because he perceives something like that. But I want to assure you, like, I'm not out there trying to part you with your money. And if you do put a super chat or something, I appreciate it. It's encouraging, but I'm not asking for it. You don't have to do anything like that. You can ask every question that you want to ask here within the chat. I will try to answer everything I can because I'm trying to help you, understand what's going on. Somebody answered him a little bit later in that chat. Thomas Patton said, "Morning, fellow carers for Ukraine." I love that term, Thomas. And he said, "Hi, Dennis. You're definitely in the wrong chat. But stay and ask the professor. He recommends the best sites to donate to directly, so YouTube doesn't get a cut." That's right. That's the way you generally want to do it. So in every one of my videos, there are links. I went back to old videos from like 2 years ago, all the way back. There are links to Greg Terry's, what he's doing, his work, because I've worked with him with the armored ambulances and that sort of thing. And it's very clear going to his organization, and it goes through his nonprofit. And I don't touch any of the money going to Ukraine. I don't want to be involved in that. I don't want to have to like give this over to him like directly. I want it to flow to him, not me touching it. So there's clear, if you want to donate to my channel, here's what you can do. If you want to donate directly to Aid for Ukraine for this or that or the other thing, here's what to do. So, and then there's like fundraisers like today. Later on today, there's a big fundraiser. Jake Bro and Anna and Starsky and Jason J. Smart and Sumileni and a number of others are doing this big fundraiser today trying to generate $50,000 for needs for the front line. So, okay. At any rate, so there you are with some of that, how where to donate and how to donate so YouTube doesn't get a cut. In my humble opinion, his income generated here just goes to fair compensation for his research and analysis. It just takes time, and I'm trying to shift gears and spend more time here rather than, uh, feeding my family. So, I mean, this is the way I go about doing that. Okay. And last thing he said was, "You don't get the nickname Credible Hulk by accident." Well, I strive to be the Credible Hulk. That's why I cite my sources as I do. Okay, so let's get to any questions that you have. We'll talk about it. We can talk about politics. We can talk about propaganda. Last week was the RT and tenant media issue breaking, slow walking aid to Ukraine. What do you want to talk about? Let me try to scratch where you itch. Hello to all of you here in the chat, Steve and Eddie, KBG, Cheryl Waitley. Cheryl's everywhere, man. You go out into a Ukraine video and she's not there. It's a very odd thing. Kevin Delaney, Stretch, Danny Dams, Reinhard, Ronnie, uh, and Annie, Paul, Robert, Reinhardt. Okay, so at any rate, let's see what I can do for answering your question. Letting Ukraine, this is Kevin Delaney, letting Ukraine use long-range systems to strike deep into Putin's homeland is critical. What's the true fear of this action? Well, I okay. So my read is that Biden is deterred by Putin, has been deterred successfully. Yesterday, was it last night? I think it was last night in my video. I showed this thing where the by Euromaidan Press would give like a dozen things where Putin said this is a red line, and then it got crossed and nothing happened. And this was a red line, it got crossed and nothing happened. And a red line. So, but Putin successfully deterred the West, and particularly Biden. Um, I think this is a too harsh a criticism, but Robert Gates, the former defense secretary, said, I think he has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security over the past 4 decades. Now, he's at least right about Ukraine and supporting Ukraine, if nothing else. Um, Robert, that's very kind of you. Thank you for that. Robert said, "Thanks, Professor, for bringing the updates and news about Ukraine to us several times a day. I'm trying. I'm doing my best, and there's only really a few dozen of us that are doing this. Like the main news is not doing it, and we want you to be informed and involved, and have a way to contact legislators and be able to donate and those kind of things. So, thank you, Robert. I appreciate the encouragement. Okay, so, but Biden has gotten some things. Hey, Greg, how you doing? Greg Terry is in the chat. So Biden has done one thing right, and that is choosing to stand by Ukraine. But the degree to which he does that is the trick. So in the early days, before the war actually broke, the Afghanistan thing was messy and it was a black eye, and it may very well have encouraged Putin. But after that, between then and when the war actually started, he was sending more mixed signals than the dyslexic third base coach to Putin. Like, don't invade, but if he takes land, he might take land. He might, but he shouldn't do that. But if he does, I mean, things can happen. I mean, like he had that kind of mixed signals. Now, after the invasion, he correctly and I'm a Republican. I don't like Biden for much, but on this particular issue, he correctly stood by Ukraine and has been doing that. Now he has slow walked aid at sometimes, and that's undeniably so. However, he has been there more in rhetoric than in getting things there in a timely fashion, but he has been consistently there, and I've got to give him props for that. But why is he slow walking things? Because he's fundamentally the way he sees the world is, if I don't provoke them, like this is the way he's dealt with Iran as well. If we don't provoke Iran, they'll be good actors and they won't create nuclear weapons. Well, they're headlong trying to create nuclear weapons. Same thing with Russia. If we don't provoke them, they won't escalate. They won't do more. They won't. And again, even I kind of understand getting it wrong at the very beginning because CIA thought that uh, Ukraine would fold and Zelensky would free. They offered him famously a ride. And Zelensky's response, I need, I need weapons, not a ride. And so um, I get that he got it wrong, but he stuck with them ever since. And that's not nothing. So I've got to give him that, but I wish he would do more. And so this morning I was looking at things, and my daily brief, which will come out in a little bit, it's talking about like he's about to lose if he doesn't use it, this drawdown authority, if Congress doesn't approve an extension. Plus plus from Greg Terry. Plus plus means like it's a Ukrainian yes, or I agree, or yes, we're with you. He's about to lose $6 billion in drawdown authority if he doesn't use it by September. This has been 6 months that he had it, and like, where's the outrage? Biden, do this, when it took 6 months for the Republicans to get on task to actually pass the bill, and we're all upset with them. I was upset with them, just like you were, and so, yeah, okay. Let's see about your questions. Okay, so if you have a question, I'm going to try to answer your question. But feel free to cut and paste your question and pop it in the chat, and then keep circling back, and I'll try to answer everything I can. I'm not trying to dodge anything. It's just when the questions go too fast, I can't necessarily catch up. Okay, so I'm going to take the last in order each time because it's right there in front of me. Biden's reset timidity, etc. Maybe seems to me follow the money as a stronger explanation. It could be, but I don't know. I mean, like people will say all kinds of theories, but I can only say what I can prove. And if I can't prove it, I say I can't prove it. I mean, if I see it in the articles, I understand. So, for example, I saw a fascinating excuse me. It's just tea, I promise. You can see the tea bag in there and everything. Um, Saw a fascinating article the other day. I would never have guessed this, but apparently most of the Shahed drones being shot down are shot down with man pads. I was like, like a high percentage of them shot down. Like, I would never have guessed that that's how what's going on. But when you can verify something, you read and then you double check the articles and that sort of thing. Okay. But follow the money. I don't know if that's the case or if it's not. Um, I'm pretty sure it's follow the money for the Russian propaganda story, and that's a whole different direction to go. But um, yeah, so we can talk about politics. We can talk about. I'm not as great of a front lines kind of guy as Greg Terry. Greg Terry's in here, and many Shaheeds fly on 10 to 30 to 100 meters high, and that would Greg Terry just put that out, and that would explain why man pads would be that effective because they're not that far up. I had the idea that they were like way up there and then they come down, but so that would explain some things. Um, so we can talk about politics, we can talk about propaganda, we can talk about what's going on in the front, but I'm not a great frontline guy, so I usually and I know my own limitations, right? I'm not a military guy, but Greg Terry's there, and we'll talk about the front together. So when I do these videos with Greg, tune into those because those are going to add a nuance that I can't provide. And in fact, subscribe to his channel too. He does amazing. I can't understand how his channel only has 12,000, almost 13,000 subscribers because his channel is far better than mine. So okay, at any rate, he does some great work, and you're about to see the armored ambulances fundraiser being delivered here over the next few days. It's pretty awesome. Um, okay, yeah, and he also added very slow, only 60 kilometers per hour. So it's going slow enough that man pads actually work. But again, I never would have thought about that. Okay, any update on the Belgorod incursion? Okay, yeah. So they lost a little ground in. Well, so if you're talking about Belgorod, are you talking about? I'm not sure if you're talking. So we're talking about Kursk, and then here's what happened in Kursk. Maybe you can clarify some things. Kursk is um, the Russians were moving down from Kornevko. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I never pronounce anything correctly, so I'm just not worried about that anymore. I try. I do my best, but if I screw up, I don't like. Oh no, I screwed up. You expect me to screw up at this point. So they're going south into like and there's a little pocket there. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians went back over the border in another place that they hadn't been, a little west of where Kursk is, and have created now a new dilemma for the Russians. So it's really interesting. And an article I was talking about this just now, before that'll come out after this, that I was preparing for my normal daily brief. They were talking about how Kursk has actually been successful in a way of really alleviating some pressure on the lines. Not as much as you would hope from Donetsk. They haven't been able to do that, um, because they really want Pokrovsk, right? But if there's more somewhere else, it can add up and create a situation where Donetsk, it eases pressure from Donetsk. And again, winter can't come fast enough for Pokrovsk to be like General Winter may very well come to Pokrovsk's aid. It's a horse race of time, how cold it gets and muddy it gets before how far the Russians can get. Okay. Although this is Vigo Holmsen, although I'm not too familiar with US politics, isn't it possible he's held back on the drawdown to have some in reserve to be allocated in case Trump is elected? It is possible. It's possibly too cautious. Well, I would certainly say it's too cautious. There's an argument that's being made, and I'm telling you that this is an argument or a perspective. This is not, I can't say this is a fact. Okay. And I try to delineate between those very carefully. So there's an argument that they're not giving those weapons or not giving the authority to use ATACMs and other things because you want to, before the election, not look like you're provoking another war, in order to get Harris elected, and then you do it as soon, day election day plus one, then you give the authority. I don't know if that's the case. To my mind, you would think, wouldn't winning in Ukraine be a better thing than to have that just kind of looming as a not winning kind of scenario, or not really doing what it's supposed to be scenario? But that's my way of thinking. And what I've realized here, over the last 2 years, is I don't see reality. I see my perspective of reality, and your perspective adds to my reality and helps me see more clearly because I'm seeing different dimensions. Um, I'm trying to remember whose quote it was. Was it Gandhi or somebody else? Like, there's seven ways that you can look at see a rock, and all of them are correct, but nobody has all seven perceptions of them. And now that's not true about everything necessarily, but there's some utility to that. And so you all influence me significantly in my thinking. And when you do, like yesterday, I put out something that was directly from the bill. Someone named Morton had contacted me and said, "Hey, look, the bill says he shall provide ATACMs." Okay, shall means you better do this, right? With the only exception if it's a problem for, like, national security, not to do that. And so that might be open to interpretation what national security threat might mean, but yeah, especially with Jake Sullivan. Okay, so let's see. JP says, because Putin goes to BRICS meeting, he's not a criminal. Come on, man. Cheryl Whaley says, I'm hearing they're worried about Russia and Iran supplying Houthis and having enough supply in weapons to counter the threat. That goes back to somebody I saw. Let me see if I can find this now. While I was pontificating, Jonathan McElravy said, did I get that right, Jonathan, now, finally? Do you think the Western stockpiles are getting low? Yeah, they're getting low, but I don't think they're low enough that they're terribly concerned. But I mean, so they can give older, less awesome weapons first, and to alleviate some of that. But I don't think that's what's driving it as much as, and this is my personal opinion, as much as a knee jerk reaction that if I don't do this, he won't react that way. It's just not understanding your enemy or your adversary, not understanding that it doesn't matter, they're going to keep going. So the old ones, he put, old ones are already gone. So then what else, what other technology or abilities or whatever can be provided? Is it just that, so then the question becomes, is it just that we don't have the attackums for them to uh to to be able to use, because we only provided them a handful? And if that's the case, that's a whole different ball game, but I don't know that that's the case. Okay, at any rate, Yeah, it's limited, but we'll see. Okay, except for Denmark, most countries have held on to strategic reserves. Yeah, most have, but there's got to be some way that you can support them in a more significant way. Okay, fairly new to your channel. This is Maranto T33. Fairly new to your channel and first live stream. Wondering what you're a professor of. So I have a kind of a mutt-like trajectory in my academic career. So my undergraduate was I started as a government major, and then I became a government and psych double major, and then a government psych double major with a minor in business. Went on and did an MBA, master's in public policy, and then my PhDs in leadership. Organizational leadership is intentionally interdisciplinary, so that actually worked well for me because I had kind of a very rounded academic background with that. And so I created at my institution both the master's degree in organizational leadership and the bachelor's degree in leadership. And so I see the world through a different set of eyes or different lenses than maybe your other YouTubers who maybe come with a, oh, thank you, blonde bombsheller. She gifted 5 memberships. I appreciate that, and there are a number of you who are seeing that they're being gifted a membership. That's very kind. Um, and so I see things differently, and I focus a lot more on politics and what's happening there than I do on, say, the battlefield kind of stuff. Because it's not. I had 2 years of Army ROTC before President Clinton killed my program and said thank you for coming. So that's as far as that went so my military analysis is not, that's why I lean very highly heavily on, say, Greg Terry and others for what's going on the ground. Okay. I don't know if I even answered the question here. Let's see. Cheryl said, I listened to uh, I'm Kurskin's latest guest for some of these perspectives because I can't understand why we didn't increase the missile range quietly and incrementally. So now here, like, that's a really interesting thing. So the threat is sometimes worse than the actual event, and I say that like that's what let's see the pull out of the Black Sea grain initiative. The threat of pulling out was really terrible for Ukraine, but actually pulling out wasn't that bad. The threat of well, the threat of nuclear is bad, and nuclear would be bad if that actually happened. But the threat is really powerful. Same kind of thing here. All the discussion here is actually leading to a place where I saw like Russia's actually pulling their planes back from some of the closer landing strips and airfields back out of ATACMS range, which is a net positive in the same way that it's a net positive for the Russian army to get out of Kherson. And now it's negative in the sense that they got to keep their whole army, and then they fortified the front lines after that with the Surovikin line. Um, but they at least got out of Kherson, and so that was a good thing. Um, Always happy to help when you can, Blonde Bomb Sheller. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's see here. We live in a capitalist system, and extending the war is good for business, and that's why we spent so many years involved in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. It's always the money. Well, there's no there's an alternative explanation to that as well. In a capitalist system, war is actually a net drag on the society, and you would want to alleviate war and get away from the wars as soon as possible so that you can actually buy and sell and trade freely and get it. Like the only people benefiting would be like uh, major military contractors, but everybody else it's a net negative too. So I'm not sure that I quite buy that theory. I'm sure they have an interest in it, but yeah. Okay. Let's see who else. Mr. Squiggle, an American First Patriot Memory Storm Shadow production was is that is that to me? I don't think that's to me. Okay. I was just wondering. Callus said you trademarked your name, register Callus. R with a little circle in it or around it. I was just now wondering how much different partners of Ukraine earn on the weapons they provide and how much sticks on the way there. Uh, that's a good question. I don't begrudge them making profit to get it up and running. In fact, part of the problem that we have right now is that, like, nobody wants to set up an assembly line unless there's a long-term contract for, say, um, let's just say artillery. It's going to take a while to get the artillery shells up and running. You have to set up the entire line, and that there's this fixed cost to the setup that's going. So if you do it for a year, that's different than if you do it for 10 years with a large contract. And so, they have to. They're in business. They have to make it. The alternative is you have government make it, and government tends to be terribly inefficient. So. I don't begrudge. I mean, as long as it's within normal range of profit, I don't see any issue with that. Um, okay. Let me go back up a little bit. Just saw Prof. KBG says, Prof, do you think that we'll start to see Russia's stockpile of Soviet era armored vehicles running low to the point where they can no longer sustain large scale offensives? Next year is too optimistic. That's correct. It's too optimistic. I talked about this once. I don't remember when. All this blurs together. I'm sorry. It's hard to keep track of everything. I feel like I could write another dissertation here. Um, so an article that I covered about 4 months ago, might be a little bit longer than that, talked about, like, look, they're not running out of anything anytime soon. They'll run out of this and that and the other thing in 25, 26, 20, 28, that kind of thing. I mean, it's going to be a long time. I mean, so dictatorships tend to spend a disproportionate amount of their energy, and including totalitarian states like the USSR, on military surplus kind of stuff. I mean, they just tend to build that up. It's really interesting to see how authoritarian regimes tend to spend wildly on military rather than creating a capitalist society that can grow an engine of economic energy and improvement, and then as a byproduct buy military stuff, which is kind of like what the Western model is. So they have lots of stuff. They're not going to run out of, like, tanks for another 2 years. They're not going to run out of, and the replacement value is they can put four back on the battlefield a day, which is what I highlight with Andrew Perpetua's list when we go through, or not Andrew, yeah, with Andrew Perpetua's list, and when we look at the daily losses. Um, so it's going to be a while before that kind of thing can happen. Um, yeah, I had another thought and I just lost it. I'm sorry about that. Here's the other thought. It had nothing to do with the question, but there's a Discord channel, and I want you all to be able to be there and participate. I'll put the link back out on Patreon again because there's only a few dozen of you that are actually there, but all of you have already so I put it behind the firewall of members and patrons, and I did that for a reason because that way I have a filtered audience that is really hyper focused on this and no trolls, because trolls don't want to, step up into being a patron or member, generally speaking, and they really do care. Like the guy I started with in the very beginning, Dennis, I think he really does care and just saw it differently. So, okay. Greg Terry said, what would be interesting to see, if possible and accurately, was the amount of true supply coming from North Korea, Iran, China, silently. Yeah, they are supplying things silently, like motors for drones and things along those lines. For motor, the Russian homemade drones are the motor supplied from China. Russia's really bad about like building things like domestically. They don't tend to do that. Versus how much Ukraine is truly being supplied. That would be fascinating. You're right, Greg. I 100% concur. Um, Vigo says, most analysts say mid 2025 seems to be a point where the stocks start to dwindle in certain areas. That's correct, but only if they're not resupplied and if sanctions are kept in place and strengthened. That's also correct. And it's going to be limited. Like that's when, like, armored personnel carriers start to drop off and certain other things. But the supply of human beings, they can go on for a long time. And that's really the trick. Ukraine Ukraine can't fight one to one on loss of human beings. That's just not, and they're not trying to. They're trying to preserve life, generally speaking, from everything I can detect. So, okay, um, that's a great question. Thomas Patton asked, "How will a seam freezing over affect its use as a defensive barrier?" I don't know that. Greg, can you speak to that? Do you understand enough about, like, how are rivers crossable when they freeze over, in the winter? Because that's I hadn't even thought of that question. You guys are like I I love learning from you all because you ask questions or provide no. So Greg says no. That won't so no means that will not affect its use, or no means that they will be able to use. I'm thinking you're saying no, it won't change anything. But please, only very small tributaries will be able to freeze over. Okay, gotcha. All right. But so, yeah, yeah. So Jonathan McElravy said by foot, yes, tank, no. Okay. All right. Water still flows in winter, keeping the ice from getting very thick. So good. So we learned something. So we got to build some dendrites. Isn't that lovely? Okay. Lloyd says, I'll take another approach. Do you believe the situation in Ukraine would be different today if the US went all in on the get-go? So they weren't going to go all in on the get-go because they at the very start of the war, our CIA thought, Ukraine's likely to fall. Like, look, we were all looking at that at the time when Zelensky says, I need ammunition, not a ride, going, oh, he just signed his death warrant. Like, that guy's got guts. But now, what he did, as far as leadership's concerned, is he was involved in what's called sense making in the academic literature. And that is like people don't know what's going on, but the leader's signal is sending a very clear message. And they were like handing out rifles like candy, weapons for defense, and immediately like sending. So everybody understood right from the start, we're all in to defend. That was great. But it took a while for the US government to go like, hmm, maybe they can do something here. Maybe we should support them. And then they started doing it. And so it took a while for that to happen. Now, that being said, as soon as they got the memo, if they had armed them in a more significant way earlier on and were all in, sure. But they weren't going to get that right away. Back to Greg Terry with the water flow. 100% water flows. Need to remember the elevation changes keep water moving well. All of Ukraine slopes downhill to the Dnipro River and the Black Sea. So I would, had I tried to answer that myself, I would have thought, oh, maybe they have a significant problem here, but apparently they don't. Um, just Yeah, so Tim Stocking just put at Professor Gerdes, "You better be getting paid for this. I just had to click out of a commercial interrupting you." So, yeah, I do from YouTube ads. My model is not predicated on trying to like, I need a super chat. I will answer your question if you give me a super chat. Like if you do, I appreciate it, but if you don't, I'm still going to try to answer your questions here. And everyone here has already stepped up to support me, so I really appreciate that. And so that's not who I am. I feel weird about asking for that. I don't feel weird about asking for armored ambulances, right? Like there, I'm like, hey, whatever you can give, you're going to be saving lives. This is great. Let's go do this thing. Um, but I don't know. I'm not a salesman. I'm a professor. It's just different. So, okay. Let's see. Hey, folks, only 160 likes. Oh, thank you, Blonde Bombsheller. Only 160 likes. Let's show the professor some love. We can do better than that. Also, please leave a comment after the stream. It really helps the algorithm. So thank you for suggesting that. I appreciate that very much. Again, we're all on the same team trying to spread understanding, context, help for Ukraine. We're all trying to do the same thing. Thank you so much. Let's see, Plowman Vestolinov. I'm sorry. Hello from Germany. Do you plan to visit Europe or Ukraine in the near future? Thanks for the good coverage so far. So I've been to multiple Eastern European countries, but I'm also, I mean, I can't like just leave school. And I have a family that you know, is reasonably young enough that I can't really travel very easily. But when I was a younger man, I traveled and I was in Lithuania, Belarus. Yeah, Belarus, believe it or not, Bulgaria, Romania. So I've been to the region. I was like right across. I almost lost a shoe because I was stupid, and I decided I wanted to set my foot in the river across from between Romania and Moldova, and it almost got lost in the mud. So I was within that kind of proximity, and I think that's one of the reasons that I paid so much attention to it and thought like, hey, like I have a theory, a pet theory that is. Um, People that so I know my audience is like if you older than me, generally speaking. I'm 51 and my audience is predominantly about two-thirds of it is 55 and older. Okay. So my theory is that if you remember the Cold War and or you have traveled to Eastern Europe post Cold War or even during the Cold War, you're much more connected, much more tuned in to this issue where younger folks who don't have that memory don't see it the same way, and that's part of the problem. Tell me what you think about that. Am I off base or? I mean, it seems reasonable to me. Okay. The support that we provide to the professor is worth the cost to get a concise summary of your news that we don't get elsewhere. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm happy. I mean, I'm again, my model is not. This is why I don't do a lot of live stream kind of like some models are predicated on doing live streams daily to soak up the super chats. That I'm just trying to provide context and help you understand. And I don't have the hours to spend like I can't spend 3 hours on a live stream, whatever. I got like a other responsibilities I have to attend to. And so yeah, that this is just how I function. I think those of us who are older think of Russia as mortal enemies. Yeah, like so when did Russia become the good guys? Like that's what I'm trying to understand. And I think there's just a weird political phenomenon where when in 2016, pre-2016, I saw polling and Republicans generally thought Russia was bad and Russia was a real danger. And after the 2016 election, and I don't think it's because they helped Trump win as like that's not what caused it, but the political domestic backlash saying it's Russia gate, right? I think all that soured Republicans. Un, un, Unfortunately, they shouldn't have just gone well. We're not for Russia, but so Russia must be good. Like, don't be a baby about it. You shouldn't just knee jerk reaction to it. But I think that's part of what happened in Republicans thinking Russia's not bad. Even Mitt Romney was talking about Russia was the big threat, and Obama laughed at him. If you remember that debate. Anyway, okay, Jonathan McElravy, what's the impact of U.S. public support? What impact on U.S. public support is based on the lack of Ukrainian immigrants in America? That's a good question. I don't know how to speak to that one. There's lots of Ukrainian immigrant. Like I grew up in New Jersey, 20 miles outside New York, so we had all kinds of immigrants. So I grew up. One of my pals was Dan Wierzinski, right, Ukrainian, and he, so I don't know. I know there are pockets like around Chicago. There's really big support or big pockets of Ukrainian, whatever. But it's even more pronounced in Canada, and so maybe there's something to that. I'm out of my depth on that one. Seems to me, born in 1966, that my whole school education was Soviet Union, so I never learned about Ukraine as its own country, and I didn't pay attention to international news about to learn about Ukraine. That's right, neither did anybody else. And in fact, if you asked the high school you whether you thought that you would be so supporting this segment of what was the Soviet Union against another part of the Soviet Union, you'd be like, really? Like this is what we're but since 1991, they've been really trying to grow into a Western sphere and democracy and that sort of thing. But it's remarkable to see the difference between Russia and Ukraine since 1991, how they've grown so differently once they got away. I've been to Lithuania 3 times, and in yeah, I remember the movie Red Dawn, right? Um, been to Lithuania 3 times, and, while I was there, it was really interesting to see what we dubbed. Now, this was in 2001, so they'd only been broken away from the Soviets, for 10 years, right? But they really wanted to be part of the West, and they really didn't like Russia, and they were really still suffering from what we called the Soviet hangover, where they didn't see things. They were growing into being able to think like Westerners and act like Westerners and do the things that we would just naturally take for granted in the West. Like, well, why don't you just go do this? You have, you can go do it. Oh, yeah. I was waiting for somebody to tell me. And now that's not slamming them. I love Lithuanians. They're awesome, and they're some of Ukraine's biggest supporters. But it was like it was an interesting thing. Um, to see them having to kind of work through work out of their system or get out of their system um what's been in it, if that makes sense. I mean, okay, Keely Jan, you would think more Ukrainian descendants and the Ukrainian refugees would return to Ukraine and join the army. So I have a good friend from high school, so when the war broke, I was asking people that I knew, like a guy that I knew through his wife, who's Ukrainian, about context. I was asking this guy I knew in high school, not a different guy. His name was Roman. Um, asked him about like he was like, man, I got to go back. I got to join. And like my friends were talking to him about, look, man, you're 50. Like what exactly do you think you're going to be able to do on the battlefield? Like you're far more useful here doing things here to try to help, drum up support or that kind of thing. So there is some of that. Okay, at any rate, let's see here. Live in Bulgaria back in 2004 for 6 years and listening to people there. There's still some for Russia, but not all. Some of the horror stories I've heard wasn't good. Generally speaking, when I run into somebody who lived under the former Soviet system, they're horrified by what's happening in Ukraine. And when they see in the West us moving into doing that kind of thing, clamping down on free speech or whatever it is. So that's pretty common kind of thing. Yeah, there's just something really profound about that experience marking them. What else do you want to talk about? We can talk about propaganda. We can talk about politics. We can talk about what's happening with weapons getting there or not getting there or whatever. Okay, so Ronnie just popped up and said Jan Poland is thinking about snitching on the refugees that should be. Or Poland is thinking about snitching on the refugees that should be drafted. Poland is also having a squabble with Germany. Not all is well in Europe. Yeah, Poland and Germany don't see eye to eye on many things. And the closer you are to Russia, the more that you are pro Ukraine and like rabidly so. The Baltic states and Poland are the fiercest defenders because that's where they live. But Poland is talking about not providing as much aid so that they go back to Ukraine because they need to go back and defend themselves. Now, I didn't see the details of that. I don't know that what that looks like. If that means women and children too, that's different than if it means men. Ukraine is desperately needs men. The army has been attrited. Yeah, and that's correct. But when they win, there's a different spirit than when they feel like 2023 was really miserable. And there was like if there was a low ebb of morale, 2023 was pretty low. But some of the Kursk offensive seems to have had a significant morale boost for parts of the country, not necessarily on the front line, because if you're on a different part of the front line, that's maybe not so exciting that they're over there and here. But the guys that were in Kursk were talking about, like, I feel like a tiger for the first time. I feel like been set free. I can go take the fight to the enemy. Okay. Full Irish Gary says, hi from Dublin. The news that troubles me the most this week is the use of drones with rocket launchers. Yeah, I just talked about this in my last video that'll pop out after this chat. There's drones with Okay, so they about 2 weeks ago, I showed you a drone with a, AK-47 or some equivalent on it. Um, and yeah, Greg also said the number one booster is international support, and that's why it must not stop. Absolutely, 100%. Uh, yes, yes. They need their partners need to be sending a clear message. Okay, back to the drone thing. Drones with AK-47, and I showed the video, or I showed a still of the video, a drone with a. I thought it was an N-Law. It wasn't an N-Law the other day, and I showed another one today with a, like some kind of like rocket on that you put on your shoulder and fire. It was that kind of thing. And I also showed a flame throwing dog. It was remarkable. It was a like not dog, like wolf, but a dog, mechanical dog, like a dog robot that they could put a camera on and go scout out stuff. Well, then they attached a flamethrower to her. It was the most amazing thing, and like the Ukrainians are crazy intelligent in putting these kinds of things together. Okay, I missed a lot while I was trying to explain that. Um, Guy, our military RAF has designed a missile firing drone, but it's not long been tested in production. Oh, that'd be interesting to see. But at any rate, to your point with the rockets on drone, yeah, it's the future is here. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie to see these kinds of things actually happening. Um, Radek says these drones are going to be useless eventually. Yes, but not now. So they will be useless eventually, just like tanks are almost useless compared to drones. A $500 drone has been able to knock out a $2 million tank. Like, who would have thought? So thank you, Robert. Robert said, "Hi, everyone. Hit the like button to spread to support the professor." Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the likes because that will help spread this video. And like if you remember to hit a like button on a video, that goes a long way for me. I appreciate that. Okay. As plur As with poor black and white versus Vietnam frontline cannon fodder, there are some big divisions inside Ukraine, Eastern, Western, religious, ethnic. Who sent to the front line is not uniform. Yeah, it's even worse in Russia. But I'm sure that there's some kind of an effect. I don't know enough. I'm not an expert enough to know what the effect is there. Besides all the moral reasons, says Mike Chilton, the U.S. needs to help Ukraine win for the alliance with their ingenuity and how their effectiveness has grown alone. So, one of the hidden stories here, one of the, it's kind of masked, but the delay in U.S. allowing the long range missiles has been that Ukraine has actually built up a lot of its own domestic ability to strike. With the drone missile thing, that they're working on their own missile. They have pretty tremendous capacity with just plain drones. Um, and and that has been healthy. It's been a painful process, and it's unfortunate. I wish that they would do something. I wish that they would provide the aid now, but because they haven't provided the aid as quickly as they needed to, the Ukrainians have been generating their own resources along the way. So it's it's pretty amazing to watch. Um, Todd said, "I never wake up on time for these on the weekends." I'm sorry about that. Again, I do this at this time, trying to just fit something in. And thank you all. I appreciate you all being willing to listen and trying to answer everything that I can. If he's in Ukraine, different story, but he's not legally has done nothing wrong. Probably has left. I don't know what we're talking about. Or you're talking to somebody else. Sorry, I'll get back to something else. Professor G, thank you for a commitment to Ukraine. Ambulances are a great need. Yeah, keep watching Greg Terry's channel about that. You're going to see the armored ambulances actually arrive shortly, and it's awesome. I mean, it's fascinating to think that you're part of actually keeping some Ukrainian soldiers alive who haven't been able to get out. Where was I hearing this? Greg, forgive me if this was your channel and I'm not citing you properly, but um, there was I think I read it somewhere, or it might have been Greg's channel. But there's a soldier that they're pinned down, and again, drones have made it such that they can see everything. Right, soldier is 300 meters from where he needs to get to be able to be picked up to be evacuated. He's languishing there for 2 or 3 days because they can't actually get out to him, right? Like, because they know that if they just take a regular vehicle out to get to this guy, that that vehicle is going to get blown up, and now you got two people out there, out there, right? So they do need things like the armored vehicles, and yeah, okay. At any rate, it's bad. Ronnie says, do you think that the ATACMs are still held back until Iranian missiles are placed to target Ukraine, or are they waiting till elections? Um, okay. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know which it is. I know that they know which boat had the Iranian missiles, and how they're transporting it and that sort of thing. But I don't know why they're doing it. My gut would say that it's elections, and that's tragic. But I could be totally wrong about that. So I'm putting that caveat. I could be totally wrong. Uh, Greg Terry answered that unit will have armored Kosovac. That's called the Kosovac. Isn't that a cool name? Kosovac within 48 hours. It was that, Greg. It was that particular. It was you talking about that. Is that right? I'm trying to remember where I got that from. Um, so yes, sir, he said. Okay. So yeah, I mean, isn't that tragic? Doesn't that break your heart that, you got to think, like, each person here, this is somebody's son or father or brother or whatever, and any lives that we can save is worth it. Professor, are wounded Ukrainians sent to hospitals in Europe for long-term recovery and rehabilitation? I don't know. I know that their hospitals in Ukraine are very full, but I don't know what degree. I know that in some special cases, I've seen some things about it, but I don't know how much or how widespread that sort of thing is. Lisa Van Valen says, does Ukraine make armored vehicles? I'm sure they make some, but not enough, something easy for the West to provide. I don't know that they do. And part of that is that they're getting plenty of donations from other places. And so donations are a double-edged sword. They help you by having you have immediate need, but they also keep you from creating necessarily some of those things. So I don't know that that's a big thing. I don't remember seeing Ukrainian armored vehicles other being made other than old Soviet stock. Yeah, it's crosstalk. Okay. The bloody snatches maybe could have saved Pete. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of, well, so how Pete died might not have done that, but certainly other people in that kind of situation would have been saved by that. So I can't really speak to how that all played out, but yeah, I mean, this was all Pete's project. I mean, Pete's brainchild, and it will be saving Ukrainians past his expiration when he has passed on. And I think he would be very pleased to know that that he's still offering protection. Okay. Greg or Darren, are Ukrainians able to use Fisher houses? Greg, you can speak to that. Maybe I don't know anything about that. KGB says, will Ukraine will want to have security guarantees to agree to any peace agreement? Are there satisfactory guarantees Ukraine can find from the West if NATO is not an option? So, see, that's the thing. Like, they were supposed to have guarantees already, and those guarantees were by the U.S., the U.K., and Russia in the not Minsk, in the Budapest Memorandum. And, like, how much are the guarantees actually worth? And how much can you trust Ukraine to actually fulfill what, I mean, not Ukraine. How much can you trust Russia? How much can Ukraine trust Russia to actually fulfill those guarantees? I think unless Ukraine is under NATO's umbrella, it will never feel safe. That's my feeling. And I could be wrong, but I think that's where it is. And nobody in the neighborhood is like, you know what? We have to defend against Poland, or we have to arm ourselves even against Hungary, right? It's all about Russia. Russia is the focus of the problems in the neighborhood, and everybody knows it. Yeah, McElravy says treaties will not protect Ukraine. I think that's fair. Greg Terry doesn't know about Fisher houses. I don't know anything about it either. So uh, Jason Thomas says, proud to have donated toward the vehicles. Thank you very much, Jason. We really appreciate that. Um, grew up with these beasts when my father was in the British Army for 23 years. Jasper says, do you think Ukraine is working on nuclear weapons? I have no idea. I'm sure they're working on what the biggest, baddest thing that they can come up with to bring pain and trauma to Russia, but I don't know that nuclear is within their grasp. Uh, it takes a significant something to work out nuclear, and that seems like it would be detectable, and it might not be a good idea because it could backfire. Um, right now, the so Ukraine has I see this a lot where people will say, well, Ukraine might have done that. Ukraine might have done this other thing. Ukraine does not want to lose the sympathy of the West. They need their partners in order to survive, and they know that, and so they'll color within the lines. Um, so nuke is easier than you think, but it's also, I think, detectable, and they'll lose their sympathy. You could be right, Jonathan. Maybe creating it's not the biggest difficulty, but the what happens when they use it, and what does that look like on the other side. So, I you could be correct. I'd think that if Ukraine does this, the political center of gravity shifts from under their feet. That's just my read. Okay. Do you think that do you envision any event or point at which NATO countries would deploy troops into Ukraine to help defend Ukraine? Man, I don't know. I don't know, like, what red line gets crossed there. I perhaps after a Russian nuclear event. I have no idea, though. I just don't know. Um, Let's see, but the resource retros with Mike says they don't need to work out nuclear. They already done that once as part of the USSR. It's mainly an engineering or industrial challenge for them to do it again. Ladies and gentlemen, mostly gentlemen, my audience is 90% male. I'm out of my depth in talking to about nuclear. I really don't know enough to even be dangerous here. So I'm going to admit my ignorance about how much nuclear or whatever they can do. I can tell you what they might calculate politically is, and that's why I'm saying I don't think that they're going to I don't think that they'd want to do that and then potentially lose their partners. But Jonathan McElravy works in the industry, so he's a greater source than I am. You can read that in the comments. The old nuclear facilities inside Ukraine are empty and in horrible condition and would have to start new, according to Greg Terry in his comments here, and says he's been in them. Well, that's a little chilling if, if they're old and horrible. And um, okay. Uh, let's see here. What else? Poland won't leave Russia to take Ukraine and be on their border. I'm not sure if I understand what you were saying, Guy. Credible. Mike Chilton said, "Credible Hulk admit ignorance." That's right. If I don't know something, I don't know something. If I know because it's from a verified source, I'll tell you that. And if it's speculation, I will tell you that. And that way, you can tell whether something's legit or just something that I think is a theory, and that's not the same thing as whether it's a fact. Okay. I think Ukraine is just better off making their own long-range missiles. I would agree, Adam. I think that's, optimal to the degree that they can actually make that work. Um, a year ago, I bought a Lodine table and haven't used them. Don't know what that is. having there been major studies with support from however, there have been major strides with support from Western sources. Yes, there have been major strides. They are working toward that end, and to the degree that they can keep that moving and keep that from getting stuck up or clotted, that the better. Bruce Ingle says, JM, where does Ukraine have space and a time for heavy water and nuke refinement plants? It wasn't so. Yeah, that's a good question for McElravy. While he's doing that, I'm going to see if I can grab my Discord link, and I'm going to pop that into the chat here. Well, maybe I'm not going to pop that into the chat because other people will be able to see it afterwards, won't they? So what I'm going to do is after this, I'm going to take the Discord link and I'm going to put it back out under a member um, post for just members, and I'm going to put it out for patrons so that you all can see that, and then you can join me in Discord. I don't have a lot of Discord members. We have a very small community, but the small community is actually it's only a few dozen, but you're all people that sincerely, deeply care. And so there's like no trolling. We just think great thoughts out there. And so thank you for those of you who joined me there. Okay. Other topics, anything else? Want to talk about propaganda like RT and Tenet Media or that sort of thing? Or um, we're almost winding up an hour, but we can go a little bit longer if you want to talk about that. KBG says, what's the number one biggest problem Ukraine faces now on the battlefield? Lack of manpower, ammo, if so, what kind? So ammo is bad, but manpower is worse. They really have to right that ship in recruitment, in my estimation, in order to stay on top of things. Um, Blonde Bombsheller says, Prof, I didn't know you had a Discord. Color me in there, sir. Sure, absolutely. Come and join us. Look for that link on the other side of this. It'll be in the member post or on Patreon. Let's see. Nobody is as strong as JP. Nobody, what? Hey, okay. Ex-Virginia state senator puts out 4 videos a month reading RT headlines. Yeah, but you know what happened here when we took RT off of major media, they went underground and it got worse. So, like, I'm a free speech guy, but free speech and free speech is important. And I think, like, taking it off of YouTube and other things, you you don't take it off, you challenge it. Again, that's my academic political kind of framework. I think you don't, because what they did was, because it was hard to access, they just went underground, used these influencers, and now it's twice as hard to detect, or twice as hard to fight because it's hard to detect. And so that's a real dangerous thing. Cheryl, if I popped a link into the chat, can't other people see that afterwards in the um, in the replay? I mean, that's what I'm trying to avoid here. I'm trying to keep trolls out and just keep the hardcore here. So I'll put the link to Discord back on the Patreon page, or I'll send it out as I'll see if I can send it as a message to all paid patrons, and I'll put it out as well to members so that we can. No, they can't. So if I put it in the chat, they can't see the chat. Okay, well, I can do that then. Now, let me see if I can grab the link. Here's the, if I can remember where I grabbed the link from. Okay, this should, the invite link. Where do I grab the invite link from? I know how to use this, and I do use it at a fairly novice level. Users. Give me a second. Okay, so that's embarrassing. I'm trying to find my invite link, not just to create the. You can also set an expire timer link. This chat is public, so don't paste it if it's for members. Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Well, at any rate, I'll do what I said earlier after I figure it out. Okay. Any last questions, comments, or snide remarks? Well, does the U.S. have a post-Putin plan? or do you think they will try to push him out of office? I think that they don't want to push him out of office because they don't know what will come next. I think they have. It's like there's a quote by Jefferson, like we have the dog by the ears and we can't hold on and we can't let him go. I think that's how they're understanding this. So I think now this is me talking. I think that a number of countries, including Germany and maybe in the US, are looking to post-war reconciliation with Russia. And so that's part of the slow walking. It's not the whole thing, but they also don't want uh, to have something other than Putin, which is predictable but bad because you don't know what's predictable or what's not predictable, and that's troublesome to them. Um, Now, for me personally, I don't want Russia to collapse and fall apart. And the reason for that is I want Ukraine to get their children back. And in a collapsed Russia where you can't tell if it's, like who's in charge where, and there's, various factions fighting with each other, that makes it very difficult. I want them to lose and then have to pay reparations and give Ukraine's children back and that sort of thing, but as one institution. And then if they want to break it up afterwards, if that's immaterial to me. Keep it, break it up, whatever. But they need to pay the consequences for what they've done, and Ukraine needs to get their children back. Professor Gerdes, at what juncture would public demonstrations of support for Ukraine at the same time and the same day in all 50 states be appropriate? Would have been appropriate for years, but I mean, I don't coordinating that seems ridiculously difficult when really the voice of everything that's happening comes from um, 3 dozen YouTube channels. I mean, there is some major media there. I mean, like the Guardian has been excellent at this. Um, Al Jazeera weirdly has been very good at this. Um, and so there's been some coverage in print media, but as far as like on TV, mainstream media, it's been very, very poor. But once if Ukraine starts winning, they'll pick up the tempo and show it. Like when you see significant events, they do pop into the news. Okay, Russia needs those kids to make more Russians. Major population skew because of the war. That's right. I talked about the population skew yesterday in Ukraine, and it's worse in not the total aggregate losses, but the percentage has been significant in Russia. A plus. That's very good. Good people. I have to leave now. God bless everyone. Good. I got to leave too, so that'll work out well for us. Media coverage would be like what was done during the Vietnam War. I think it's really well. You guys going quickly here, Professor Gerdes. Do you ever lecture in Atlanta, Georgia? Would love to attend there or somewhere else, maybe at your college. No, I don't travel very frequently. Um, as I said earlier, um, but yeah, that's very kind of you. Thanks for the excellent and informative live stream. Chat had excellent questions. By the way, last thing I want to tell you, there's a big fundraiser today. Jake Bro, Anna, Starsky, Sergey Sumileni. So look for this. You'll see it on YouTube. They're trying to raise $50,000 in 24 hours. So please go and look for that. I've been saying it. I saw it just 2 days ago. I've said it in almost every video since. We're all pulling on the same team, right? I mean, we're all trying to help the same cause. You'll get some great information, I'm sure, from that fundraiser. And if you can give to something useful, that's a place to be. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you very much. Thank you for the time. And I thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. I really deeply appreciate that you're here. I deeply appreciate the likes. I appreciate the comments. And I will get that. I'll figure out the Discord and get you the link very quickly. All right. Have a good day. Talk to you later. Bye bye.